Pest and Predator podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Whether you're a farmer, researcher, or educator, visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can work for you. Shaun Haney here with RealAgriculture.com. It's time for another episode of the Pest and Predator podcast, brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Really thank both parties for their support of the Pest and Predator podcast. Today, we are joined by Amanda Jorgensen, who is with Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation and is an insect management specialist. Amanda, great to chat with you.
Yeah, great to chat with you too, John.
Okay, so what do you talk about? What exactly does an insect management specialist do? What's your role?
Yeah, so the on paper title is insect management specialist, but essentially I'm the provincial entomologist for Alberta Agriculture. So I work with the program to conduct insect monitoring for some of our big name insect pests that folks are probably familiar with through the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network, as well as, take on any exciting new issues that pop up here and there and keep an eye out for the invasive insects that we don't want to show up in the province.
Yeah, what kind of stuff are we monitoring? Are we just monitoring like population levels, movement, density of activity? Like what exactly are some of the things we're trying to track?
Yeah, a bit of all of that. So we're following population levels, with like insects like our bertha armyworm that have those boom bust outbreak cycles to kind of see where we're at in that outbreak. But also for our insects that are moving across Alberta, like pea leaf weevil, we've tracked that movement up into the Pests, or that kind of move further north and south depending on what our growing conditions and overwintering conditions are. So a little bit of everything.
Yeah. So I guess, can you expand on that and give us, for people that aren't living in this every day, but they benefit from some of this work of the insect surveillance program, tell us a little bit more about it. What do we need to know?
Yeah, so we survey, 7 kind of major pests. And these are all pests that sometimes can be a little bit hard to predict or aren't necessarily our every year issues. So we get a bit of a heads up out to producers. So those pests include pea leaf weevil, like I mentioned, bertha armyworm, our diamondback moth. We monitor that migration into the province, our grasshopper populations, our cabbage seed pod weevil in canola, as well as our wheat midge and wheat stem sawfly issues in wheat. And these are surveys that are done through a variety of different methods that have been standardized through the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network and are conducted with pretty much the same methods across the prairies. But all of those methods have been tailored for the specific insect pest. So for some of them, we're going out and actually doing sweeps and say counting the number of weevils in our sweep net bag. And for some, we're just counting the damage that we're seeing from those insects to get a bit of an estimate. And these are all random surveys that we're doing. So in Alberta, at least, we don't necessarily pre-contact producers. We love to get permission and get information for fields where we can, but we have a much smaller team than some of the other provinces. So we just don't have the capacity to phone everybody ahead of time. And by sampling randomly, we do get a better representative sample of what things look like in the province for our insect issues. So we're really lucky that we can do that. Yeah. We do still always encourage producers who want to get an idea of what they have in their fields. We do take volunteers. So, for our pea leaf weevil survey, for example, we are counting the number of notches in peas at that 4 to 6 node stage. And my hit rate for stopping at a pea field that's about an inch tall at highway speed is not perfect, I'll say. It's not perfect. So having a few stops on the list that we know are going to be peas or know are going to be wheat for our wheat midge survey and sawfly surveys that are done after harvest, that really helps. And, we do always share that information back with producers. So where we can, we try and just stop at fields where we've chatted with the producer, but otherwise it can be kind of random. And then that results are a bit more regional and not necessarily representing those individual fields, but just a good guideline that producers can refer back to.
Now, you've got a list of 7 here. Is
Hmm.
that list of 7 consistent year to year? Or
Yeah.
if we have a period of, say, 3 years of no grasshopper infestations, does something else come on? Or are these like the 7 and this is the list?
So these are the 7 that we consistently do. Um, and part of the reason that we keep them consistent is, an insect pest like bertha armyworm, for example, it's been a solid 5, 6 years at the very least since we've had any bertha armyworm outbreaks. And they get a few small pockets here and there, but then those populations will suddenly build up, and we can see a huge issue that if we're not watching for the signs of that, then folks can get caught unawares. So even if we don't have issues with those pests for a few years, it's tracking when we're going to have a problem that we're really managing there. Our program does occasionally take on additional projects if something pops up.
Hmm.
Uh, so the list of 7 is our staple year to year, but we have different projects that come in where if we have an issue for an insect pest, we might monitor it for a few years, or it, eventually may be added to the list. Like uh, a lot of our invasive pests as it popped up, like our cabbage seed pod weevil and pea leaf weevil, we have added to the list as they've shown up and expanded the areas that we're monitoring as they've moved through the province. So it does change, but
Hmm. Who funds this?
so the work that our program does is, entirely funded by the government of Alberta. It's a program that we complete through our mandate of protecting market access, as well as, ensuring that producers have tools that help protect yield. Um, the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network as a whole is funded by a number of different funders, including Western Greens Foundation and pretty much all of the major crop commissions. And it's a joint effort with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and all of the provincial partners. And all of our Western Canadian prairie provinces contribute that essentially funding of our time and a certain amount of supplies to get that done.
And you have the survey to measure the different, the 7 pests. Are you also measuring beneficial populations in each of those surveys, or only where applicable?
So there are some where it's applicable. A good example is our wheat midge survey. So our wheat midge survey, we're collecting soil core samples after harvest from wheat fields. And then we, by which I mean the royal we, because I have not had to wash out a soil sample in a long time. And poor Shelley Barkley does a lot of that. Um, so we're washing out those cores and counting the number of wheat midge cocoons that we're finding from each field. And when Shelley's finding and counting those cocoons, she actually pops each one open to look for a wheat midge parasitoid,
Hmm.
looking for that Macrogleines penetrans. And they're, you have to look at them under a scope, but they're kind of distinctive. They look a little bit like a fried egg because that wasp larva is clear, but has a bit of a distinct outline. And usually, since they're eating those wheat midge, they have that orange tissue moving through their system, and you can see it. Uh, they're kind of wild to look at. But for that wheat midge survey, we only include the number of healthy midge in the maps that we produce. So the wheat midge survey map shows the number of wheat midge cocoons less the number of parasitoids we see.
Hmm.
So that's factored into those numbers that we're showing. We're not necessarily publishing those numbers of those natural enemies directly, but it's factored in. And, like this year in Alberta, we would have had a much higher amount of wheat midge throughout the province if it wasn't for those natural enemies, because we saw quite a bit of those macrogleanies.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. And obviously you're doing this in commercial fields. So the relationship with the cooperator or the farmer, to put it in that language, is really like critical part of this.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and maybe you said, I just want to circle back.
Mhm.
Are you going back to the same fields in the survey year to year, or is it change?
It changes. So it's, pretty much random. There are a few stops where we have producers who are sending in their information and asking us to come by. So there are some fields where we probably are sampling at least in the same general area year to
Yeah.
year, but we aim to sample, a certain representative percentage of fields from each municipalities, and we pick areas that are kind of spread out throughout the municipality. Uh, so a little bit both. I mean, looking at the historical data just by chance, there definitely are fields that have been sampled a few times over the many decades that the
Yeah.
sampling's been ongoing, but we try and be as random as we can.
So this is in Alberta, but
Hmm.
let's just, obviously Alberta borders Saskatchewan, for example, and
Yeah.
so pests don't know borders. Do
Yes.
you, is there collaboration in, like, when we get to like a Western Canadian map, if that exists? Sorry if
Definitely.
okay, it does. To kind of connect and make that all there be fluidity, I guess, in this information. Does that happen?
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
all of our, protocols for how we're collecting those samples and figuring things out with the data is all standardized through the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network. And then all of the partners, we send our data into the Ag Canada lab in Saskatoon, and they produce a regional map for the Canadian prairies. And that, with that harmonized way of collecting those samples, and then they make sure that they have a harmonized way of displaying and mapping it. And that's all, you can access that through the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network, prairiepest.ca. We do also post our Alberta specific results, and all
Yeah.
of the different provincial websites, you know, post their provincial results as well.
How about cross-border Canada-US? Grasshoppers, for example, can be a huge problem in northern Montana. Is there work cross-border in some of these surveying and monitoring efforts?
That's a good question. Not to the same degree, at least for some of those insect pests. We do communicate a lot with our partners on the other side of the border and talk about what's going on and what we're seeing, and generally try to follow similar protocols, if not the same, but we're not harmonized in the same way. I think a lot of our surveying is moving that way.
Hmm.
Like if you look like for folks out east with the Great Lakes Pest Monitoring Network, they've partnered very closely with the states that are bordering the Great Lakes and kind of in that area. I know Manitoba is involved with that because they do share some of the same, pests that are more of an issue out that way. Um, and I think we're slowly starting to see that cross-border collaboration and cross-discipline collaboration really starting to increase.
Yeah, you see a lot with weed scientists too, monitoring weed resistance and some of those patterns as well.
Hmm.
How we monitor or how we come up with the survey results, has that evolved and changed, or are there tried and true methods and methodologies here that we're using?
That really depends on the survey.
Okay.
So our grasshopper survey, for example, the methods are pretty much the same as they've been since the mid 30s when they first started that sampling. And our risk rating system is actually the same. Like it was developed by those researchers doing some really wildly intense work where they
Wow.
were doing those counts and then in the fall going and checking numbers of egg cases, checking the egg cases in the spring, watching, like, I can't remember the exact frequency, but at least weekly, if not more, for that egg hatch, and spending a wild amount of time figuring that out. So even though it has been that way for a while, it is a really well tested method.
Have you,
And that means,
I have my
sorry, go
own
ahead.
methodology and test. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's the windshield test. You're driving down the gravel road
Hmm.
and you look at the population of grasshopper matter that is on your windshield. That tells you the level of infestation. Have you incorporated that into your survey?
We do actually to a little bit, not in the official maps, but the windshield test works really well when it's like 1 p.m. and you're pretty warm out, if I'm trying the windshield test on my commute out to a day of surveying and it's 10 degrees and rainy, it's not really going to work the same way.
Fair enough.
But if we don't get that windshield test passing, like we're probably not going to count a lot of grasshoppers. And if we're say wanting to collect some extra for a sweep, like we're pinning a bunch, it's like, okay, we're not going to try and collect any here because there's no way.
Yeah.
If we don't use at least a half jug of windshield washer fluid to get there, it's not not worthwhile.
Oh, oh, so true. Okay, so let's talk about the practic. Okay, so is there a pest where there has been a big change?
Yeah. So, not necessarily change in strictly pest methodology, but for our cabbage seed pod weevil surveying, that is a sweep net survey that we do in early flowering canola. And, the methodology has changed a bit, but one of the things that's really changed, I guess, is that we have more groups that are doing more on the processing end.
Mm.
And there are, quite a number of groups who have been for a long time doing more detailed processing. But as we're collecting sweep net samples, we toss them in the freezer. We are running full tilt for those week to 2 weeks that we're all out in canola, and nobody really has time to look at those right away. But because that's going into the freezer without, we're not letting things out because we don't want our target insects to get out, we get a lot of bycatch. So there's a lot of insects that just happen to be in that canola field that get caught up in our sweep nets. And historically, different groups have recorded those to different levels. Sometimes you're just counting the weevils and tossing everything in the garbage, but more people and different groups nowadays are starting to identify more in those sweep net bags. I mean, part of that is because our capacity has increased a bit. Like we looked at even just any lab, if you've had a technician that's been there for 10 years, even though we all like to say that we're tip top experts, the number of insects that you can ID confidently at year one is definitely different than year 10, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
And some of these insect groups, especially for our beneficials, are really hard. So you need that time to get that expertise if you're not, spending a ton of money on DNA analysis. So we see it, even though our beneficials that we're recording from those sweep net samples might not necessarily be natural enemies of cabbage seed pod weevil per se, because they exist, but they're not in huge numbers. There's a lot of different insects that are going to go into that canola to access the nectar, and we see a lot of beneficials that are going to impact our later season canola pests. Like we see our bertha armyworm parasitoids already flying out there, getting ready to look for small bertha armyworm larvae to lay their eggs in, and diamondback moth parasitoids. And so we can get a bit of an idea of what we have there from those sweeps. And that's increasing kind of across groups as we're going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening at once and at different times, right? So you're trying to measure the pest and its population relative to the time in the growing season, because that can evolve and be different. Man, it's really early for grasshoppers, like stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're also trying to track the beneficials and then measuring those beneficial populations and then to see what the impact their activity had on those pests. It again, it's really cool. Like it's very interesting. And I would imagine there's a lot of, from a research perspective, we'll get to the farmer and how they use this information in a second, but from just the researcher's perspective, there's got to be some real, like, that is fascinating. Like for like, there's expected result, and then there's like, this is unusual or not what we expected or different than some of the past years. That has to come up.
Oh, definitely. I think the thing that always blows my mind is, we're lucky enough that we cover a ton of different crops and different commodities,
Mm.
and seeing the interactions between, like, throughout the rotation. So, the insects that we're seeing in that flowering canola, or that we're seeing in, even in your wheat or peas, that are going to impact your different crops throughout your rotation. And we aren't necessarily going to see the benefit of those natural enemies always in that year. Um, a lot of our natural enemies are going to allow those pests to do a little bit more feeding. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily impact that pest's life cycle right away. But we see those impacts later on in, years down the road where we have fields that have high numbers of natural enemies that are a little more resilient and have a bit of a built-in insurance policy
Yeah.
with those natural enemies. Um, and just being able to see, our Macrogleanes penetrans coming out in our canola sweeps, or seeing, um, our canola natural enemies come out in the next year in the wheat, like it really ties together how much of a whole system it all is.
From a farmer perspective, okay, so
Mm-hmm.
we go to the meetings, we see somebody stand up at the front, they go through the slide deck, here's what we're expecting for the year, here's what we've been seeing through this year, all that kind of stuff. How does that info, or how should that info translate to farmer decisions in the production season?
Okay. I'm going to maybe be a bit of a cliche here, and I'll start with the cliche of
Okay.
scout, scout, scout. Um, but, we recognize that you've got a limited number of time as a farmer. You've got your 24 hours in the day and a lot of demands on your time. So part of what we really hope is that these maps can help you make some of those decisions. So for some of our insect pests, we're getting these maps out in the winter or late fall and hoping that can help make seed variety and seed treatment decisions. So say for our wheat midge, our pea leaf weevil, and wheat stem sawfly, a lot of those control methods revolve around using either resistant cultivars, or for pea leaf weevil using a seed treatment. And producers can look at those maps that they see in those meetings or on that website, and then use that to help influence what they've seen in their field. We always want folks to consider, if they're seeing wheat midge downgrading, if they saw a lot of issues with nodules in their peas, if they saw, poor yield or lots of stems fallen from wheat stem sawfly. That really is going to impact things, but that survey gives us an idea of what those populations are doing year to year. So you can combine, say, if you had a bit of wheat midge downgrading, and then you see, for the region, maybe you have really high wheat midge numbers. You can know that, okay, probably those wheat midge did successfully come out of the heads and went into the soil to overwinter. So we can expect that there might be some, continued issues if you saw them, or something to watch out for. And so at that point, you can make decisions about whether you're going to use a solid stem variety or a SM1 gene for your wheat, or seed treatment for your peas, because for a lot of those insects, there's not that much you can do in season. Wheat midge, you do have the ability to spray in season. It's a tight window and it can be really tricky though. So
Yeah.
if you are really expecting wheat midge issues, it's kind of nice to have that ahead of time and have that planned out. And we're seeing more and more with our pea leaf weevil that the seed treatments are kind of the way to go there.
And I'm a big believer in more information is better.
Hmm.
And being able to assist in the decision making process, right? And so I think also
Hmm.
historically we look at some of the practices we have in terms of trying to control these pests, and then tracking that, comparing that to what we're seeing from a population perspective. Now, there's a lot of variables when it comes to populations of different pests, but our own practices are one of those variables that we are in control of. And
Hmm.
so it just allows us to get to, I think, the improvement in terms of dealing with some of the things that are happening in the canopy. It gets us to better answers quicker.
Exactly. And then for our other insects that we've got maps for, some of those are more about prioritizing that scouting. So, like I said, you have a limited number of time in the field season, and even though we want everyone to scout for every insect all the time that they need to, you do have to prioritize some things, especially when unexpected conditions come across. So, we get those maps out for the bertha armyworm, for our cabbage seed pod weevil, and for our grasshopper, so that you can take a look at those and kind of know, okay, grasshopper numbers are, say, increasing in my area. And given what the spring conditions are, like, oh, I really got to prioritize that grasshopper scouting early on. Um, and we try and make sure that we give some little updates with the spring conditions. And then the Prairie Pest Monitoring Network puts out developmental models. So you
Hmm.
can subscribe to those and keep track of, say, they'll put out when grasshoppers are hatching this week, or grasshoppers are getting to be this stage this week. And they have a number of different insect pests that they do that for. And then, at least for folks in Alberta, we do have live maps for our bertha armyworm and diamondback moth monitoring networks. And folks can go and watch those results come in as people are scouting those traps, and get an idea, for a diamondback, if we have a really heavy early season migration, or for a bertha armyworm, if we're capturing a lot of moths, and, prioritize which areas are maybe looking to be a bit of a hot spot.
I feel like there's an opportunity here for more farmers to not only be participating in the surveys themselves, but also utilizing some of this data.
Definitely. So, we're starting to ship out our supplies in Alberta right now for our cooperators, but our, all of our trapping networks are run through agronomists and farmers and ag fieldmen who are doing a massive amount of work for us, and always say a huge, huge thank you. So for our bertha armyworm, for example, we currently have 293 sites set up with well over, I think, 100 volunteers that are going to be running traps for us this summer. And while we don't have unlimited trap supplies, we definitely encourage anybody who's interested in setting up a trap to get a hold of us. We've got the catchy bugs.r.us@gov.ab.ca that people can email to get a hold of us. And yeah, we'd love for folks to get involved. And if they're interested, or if they have questions, like, we're always happy to chat about bugs. So
Awesome stuff. Well, Amanda, this has been fantastic. Keep up the great work. And I really appreciate you talking about the surveillance network and some of the things that are happening out there in the field and how it relates back to beneficial. So thank you so much for joining us here today on the Pest and Predator podcast.
yeah, thanks for having me on, Shaun. Great
Yeah,
chat.
great stuff. And again, thanks again to Field Heroes as well as WGRF for making this podcast possible. If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, and we'll talk to you again on the Pest and Predator podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pest and Predator podcast. It's brought to you by Field Heroes, powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Visit fieldheroes.ca to learn how beneficial insects can benefit your farm.